La vamos a recibir con un aplauso a Dale, que ha titulado su presentación Digitalización y Democracia.
Perfect. Buenos dias. And that's the extent of my Spanish. Sorry. There we go. All good. Good. Buenos dias. I hail from Cleveland, Ohio. Really nice to be here in Miami. But at Press Forward, we are employees of the Miami Foundation. So I spend a lot of time in Miami, and I'm really beginning to love Miami, just so you know. Maybe I should move. Cleveland does not have the same weather. So thank you. I'm going to be probably about 15 minutes, hopefully, and then I want to leave time for questions. We are really grateful for you inviting Press Forward to speak to you. Press Forward, even though we are focused mostly in the US, we definitely have some of our foundations who care a lot about the rest of the world, more and more. And so I want to talk a little bit at the end about how we're thinking about trying to support and work with some of our fellow journalism funds around the country. So I want to talk a little bit today about innovation with purpose, new strategies to support local news. Press Forward is about 1.5 years old, and I want to start with how I got into journalism. This is my local news memory. I'm from Chicago, Illinois, and this was my paper, the Chicago Sun-Times, and this is one of the joyous days in Chicago, even though I was in grad school when this happened, but I remember my mom sending me the paper when Harold Washington became mayor. And the Sun-Times in my household was like the Bible. It had to come at a certain time every morning. If it didn't come, my mother would call to make sure that we had the paper was being delivered. I grew up just reading newspapers my whole life. I married a man who, when we were getting married, his friends said, "Now you are married, you cannot read 5 papers every morning." And I said to them, "That's okay, I like to read that many too." So even though I'm not a journalist, I come from a family, and I raised my own family to believe in the importance of all types of news. But I want to say that news didn't just come in the form of a newspaper. We also got news from our church bulletin, right? My grandmother needed that every week. And so when I think about news these days, I already had a broad definition of news. That definition has only gotten broader since I've gotten older. We all know about the local news crisis in the US. This is just one slide. There are many others you could choose of where the advertising dollars went over the last 20 years. I always want to point out that the internet and the change in the way advertising dollars flowed is not the only contributor to the demise of local news. There are a lot of other things that happened in the space, including big chains not reinvesting in themselves, right? So there's a lot of blame to go around. But what we know is that when local news shrinks, and there's a lot of research in the US at least, and I think in other countries that shows this, we know for a fact that civic engagement drops, we know for a fact that polarization increases, and we know for a fact that government costs and corruption increase. And one of the latest ones, in a small town in Arizona, just in the last year or two. A small news town is only 1,000 people. Small newspaper, mostly citizen-run, mostly all volunteer, discovered that one of their neighbors, because it's only 1,000 people in the town, had basically embezzled $40 million from a town of 1,000 people from some of their public entities. And that was found out by citizen journalists and taking from their neighbors. Without the news, you would not know that, and frankly, the town might go bankrupt. So, it's just so valuable, and we're spending a lot of time at Press Forward trying to make the case to show people why local news is so important. When I speak these days, I actually don't talk, I talk about freedom of the press, and of course that is incredibly important, but to get regular people to understand what is happening in their face, I talk about the practicality of news, why you need local news on a daily basis. And these are some of the reasons, right? Just recently, all the latest emergencies, Jersey flooding in Texas, hurricanes in North Carolina, fires in LA. I mean, it's just crazy the way that we need information just for practical quality of life decision-making and crisis decision-making. These are some of the ways that people use local news. And when I describe this, when you're talking to just regular folks, regular audience, they understand this. They totally say, yes, of course we need local news. The question is just how to pay for it. So enter Press Forward. We were formed almost 2 years ago now. I came on about 16 months ago. We are a small staff, over less than 10, but we work with a lot of partners. And our job is to really take the world of philanthropy in the US so far and get them to understand the need for support for local news. In the past, local philanthropy has not had to fund local news. You had advertising dollars, right? There were other sources of revenue. And so what I want always journalists and publishers and editors to understand is philanthropy in the US didn't have to fund local news, and so they don't always understand it. And I've had funders tell me, if 3 outlets came to me today, I do not know how to judge them. I don't know what questions to ask, because I didn't have to do it. I don't have one program officer who understands this deeply, right? So we're spending a lot of time in Press Forward training up all our funders and other funders, whether they've joined us officially or not, on what questions should you be asking? How do you ask about not just editorial stuff, because you shouldn't be involved in that. It's really on the business side that you should be asking. How are you sustainable? How are you building revenue? How are you understanding audience? What are you doing differently? Are you transporting? Are you converting from print to digital? And do you need help with that, right? Many of our foundations and our people who want to fund you all, they don't know those questions. And so we're taking a lot of time, and I know it's a little slow, but it's the way philanthropy learns. So we spend we spend all of our time in these 3 areas. We fund, our job initially is to raise money. $500 million was committed from about 22 funders, and then we've raised money on top of that, and all of that money goes back out the door to outlets. Our administrative costs are paid for by one of our foundations. We don't take a cut. And my job is to fundraise and to get those dollars out the door, but we just get them out the door in several ways, and I'll talk about that later. We catalyze. It turns out with the shrinking of the number of reporters and the number of outlets, we've got to figure out better ways to work together. We've got to figure out better ways to adjust to all of the changes in the news system and the infrastructure that surrounds it. And so we spend time thinking about how to do that together. And one of those ways we do that is through our chapters, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then we advocate. We firmly believe that there is not enough philanthropy to replace the advertising dollars that left. And so we've got to figure out a way in the US to get more government support into news, not to affect the editorial side, but to affect the business side. And so we are working in multiple states. We're supporting a lot of different things around the country to build coalitions to support local news, to advocate and find champions and elected officials, to populate and think about innovative legislation that could be tested in different places, a lot of things in that space. We focus on 4 particular priorities because we can't do everything. One is sustainability, and the way I describe it now is we can convert as many people to digital, we could hire as many reporters as we can afford, we could find a better way to talk about climate change, we could find a better way to do investigative journalism and anything you think of as in terms of what goes into news. We could do better civic journalism. We could do all of that really well, but if we can't figure out a way to sustain on the business side these outlets, none of that matters. And so we have to focus on sustainability. So for example, in May, we held a first conference in the US that brought together as many as we could get into the room fundraisers who were attached to outlets. It turns out they've never had their own conference. There's one conference at one session at ONA here, one session here. We've never had, it's a skill set to fundraise. And it's a skill set to fundraise in journalism. How do we deepen that skill set, bring more people into those roles and support them? Get editors and publishers to understand that when the fundraiser on your staff asks you to go with them to a meeting with a funder, you need to go. They need to hear from the reporter in addition to sometimes the person on the business side. We had 350 people in a room and we had a 100-person waiting list. So we will be doing that again because nobody else is doing that. We feel like that's a value add from Press Forward. Then we focus on equity because, frankly, I tell people we want to build it back, but we want to build it back better. It was never great at covering all of the cultures and different types of people that we wanted to in the U.S. And then infrastructure. This morning we are actually announcing, hot off the presses, $22.7 million in infrastructure grants. I'll talk about those a little bit. And then, of course, I talked about we're focusing on policy. Oops. There we go. How we work, that original $500 million, about $100 million is in the coffers of our pooled fund. That's in the red. Those are dollars that we pooled together as a group of foundations. About almost 20 foundations and funders are in that pooled fund. And when you see our open calls, those dollars come out of the pooled fund. That's what I call our innovative fund. We're trying to think together, how are we working together on trying new things. But the bulk of that $500 million is in our Align bucket. And so one of your funders today, Knight Foundation, is one of our big funders. They give out money on their own, separate from the pooled fund, but they count those dollars toward their Press Forward commitment. So I'm assuming the sponsorship of you guys might be toward that Press Forward commitment. So you're already a Press Forward grantee. And then we have our locals, which I'll talk about, and they raise money on their own and give out their money locally. So these are our numbers now. We're over 100 foundations and donors. We're spending a lot more time, by the way, also going after bringing in individual donors to our work, not just foundations, because if anybody here who's done fundraising, there's never enough money in staffed foundations. The money is with individuals. And so you've got to figure out a way to focus on individuals wherever you are, in addition to staff foundations. And then we're now at 41 chapters in 30 states. These are where our chapters are. The only one not colored in is we just brought in Indiana, and probably about 4 of those states are in conversations with us to come on board. And those chapters do a range of things. They start with foundations because their job, let's be clear, in the end, if you don't know anything else about Press Forward, our job is to bring awareness to the need for local news and to raise money for it. And so the chapters launch with foundations. Their job is to raise money locally to support their local news outlets. So that's the first thing that they do. But to do that, they have to bring others on board. We ask them to set a table where foundations are not the only ones at that table. There might be some other stakeholders, universities, libraries, other residents in the community who have opinions about how to support. And then they do research. What is happening in the local news ecosystem where you are? Who are the outlets? What are the ones you trust? What are the ones you don't? Don't assume you know everything. These chapters meet monthly. They learn from each other over time. And just in the last year, they alone, and it wasn't even all 41, maybe about 20 of them raised almost $40 million in a year. And so we're looking for even more funding going forward. This is it's actually more now. This is an old slide. In the first year and a half of Press Forward, between our Align funding, our pooled funding, and our chapters, we put out about $200 million into the ecosystem. And what I'd like people to understand is that of the 100 or so, about 90 of them are foundations in our midst. 2/3 of those foundations are local foundations. They are community or private. They are locally, sometimes city-based, sometimes regionally based. Most of my funders have never funded journalism before. We are bringing new people into the midst, and that's our job, is to convince people that if you fund homelessness, or if you fund climate change, or if you fund economic development, or you fund education, the second thing you fund should be news. Because you won't know what's happening, good or bad, in those places if you don't have good, local, quality, trusted news. And so people are slowly kind of understanding that. So with all the crises going on right now in the US alone, and money being clawed back, when people come to me and they say, look, we are having these choices in our budget. We have to give more money to the homeless shelter, or we have to give more money to the Economic Development Agency. I say, please go ahead and do that, but make sure you're carving out money for news. You nor your people will understand what's happening if you don't have good quality news. And so that's how we're kind of bringing people along. It's not an either or, it is a both and. We did last year an open call on, we started with small because as the news has shrunk, we basically need more diversity and ownership of news and more types of outlets, right? And so we went with supporting smaller groups that are doing really good work. Last year, we gave money to 205 outlets under $1 million each. Some of them are 2-person newsrooms, some of them are 10-person newsrooms, but half volunteer, to show our funders that small is okay. Small can survive if you just help them out a little bit. And then today, we are announcing, you'll see all over LinkedIn, it's actually $22.7 million in grants for infrastructure projects. So infrastructure for us is, you know, with outlets shrinking, they need more support in doing what they do and staying open and supporting the basics of what they do. So everything from one of our infrastructure grants, and I don't think I thought I would have ever funded this, is funding an engineer to work with like 20 different radio stations in the Mountain West so that they can jointly fix their equipment. They couldn't do that alone. They couldn't afford an engineer alone. So they're gonna share one, and literally he's gonna be riding in amongst these like 4 or 5 states, helping them fix their aging equipment. But without that, they wouldn't be able to do what they do because they're often very rural areas, and they need radio because, frankly, they have very bad Wi-Fi in other spaces. And so that's an infrastructure project, right? We have infrastructure projects focused on mental health and safety for journalists. You guys are under threat. I tell everybody I'm in a room of journalists, thank you for your service, because the world is crazy right now, all over, and now in the US too. We're no different than any other country, and we hear about threats, and threats not coming from crazy people, threats coming from a sheriff following a reporter home, right? I mean, so we believe it's important to support our own. And so some of these grants will support legal supports, safety, and mental health supports for our local journalists in the US. So we just know, and you all experience this every day already in your countries, we're just in a time of profound transformation and we're not going back, right? So the question is, what does it look? I tell people, when Press Forward started, we were focused on the press part of Press Forward, but we need to be focused on the forward part. It has already changed. The question is, what does the change look like? How do we weather that change? How do we get stronger through that change? And how do we make sure we protect press freedom? So we're moving now from top-down remote ownership. There's a lot more local investment. We need multiple revenue streams to keep these outlets open. The outlets that are doing well in the US, frankly, are very community-centered. Audience drives revenue. And so you've got to figure out audience, and you've got to always go back and see what your audience wants. It's not like people don't get information. They get all sorts of information. It's, do they get your information? And so how do you make sure they are focused on you? What do you do to do that? How do you understand when someone comes and says to me, which they have done in a particular city, and I said, what's your audience? And they literally said, all of the African-American people in the city. I said, that's not true. Tell me exactly what neighborhoods are reading you, right? And how do you go deeper with them as a start? And then you can broaden out, right? It's usually starting smaller and going out. But that takes a level of sophistication and research that we're trying to give people money to have. So just talking briefly about some of the new models that we've been supporting. The Invisible Institute is in Chicago. They are doing data research, and so they won a Pulitzer last year, focusing on something that actually had been happening for a long time, but no other outlet in Chicago had paid attention to it, neither did the government, on the missing Black women. And they used data to show, unfortunately, the large numbers of missing Black women, how they're missing, where they're missing, and they won a Pulitzer for it. But they used researchers also focused in community, and they just focused on an issue that people were not focusing on. Documenters is something that's really popular now here in the US. There's over 25 sites, and there's gonna be more because we're gonna give them one of our infrastructure grants. Because there's less reporters, right? People aren't covering public meetings. Documenters started in Chicago, and they pay residents under $20 an hour to just document public meetings, and many of those things get turned into stories. They are so popular. I did one of those grants in Cleveland. I wasn't sure, frankly, if it would go over well. And within 6 months, we had 600 documenters. We're now at 1,000. And think about it. If people care about documenting public meetings and they read that, think about other news that they probably want, they just don't get. And these are some other things that are just happening around our country recently. In Alabama, Macon County is actually in Alabama, not the one in Georgia. The Economic Development Agency recently bought the newspaper because they didn't want it to go out of business. And so I am now talking to some of the economic development and housing people later this fall about, is that a way in some places that you can make that happen as long as there's editorial independence? I love one of our 205, Connecta, Arizona. They based all their work in WhatsApp, right? They started in COVID. It's all in Spanish. And they found out there were people who needed, at first, healthcare information, but now a lot more information. And she is doing fabulously in Arizona in the manner in which she does her work on WhatsApp. We now have so many more student journalists. And we have a big grant out to the University of Vermont from the Knight Foundation to help work with all sorts of colleges that are attached to news deserts. So it turns out there's like over 1,000 counties in the US that have either no news or next to no news or close to no news, but they have colleges or community colleges attached to them or within them. So how could we use the student journalists at those community colleges or at those colleges to both focus on their university but also focus on the community? There's lots of examples of this around the US, including in Vermont. And so we've now got 200 or 300 colleges in this network to figure out how to do that more, right? I tell people you have to do more with less. Everything's an asset when things are falling apart. So now students become more of an asset. In New Jersey, recently, they're one of our stars in terms of getting government money into news. They already had somewhere between $2 and $4 million line item in the state budget. That was going to be completely cut to zero. They worked really hard with a lot of different stakeholders, including residents, and they got $2.5 million last month back into a line item for news. So we're going to have to pursue lots of avenues to support what we would like to do going forward. And I just like to, everybody, my funders ask me all the time, what's the one solution? There's not going to be one solution. We're going to have to figure out multiple. And you figure out in your community, with your type of news, what's the right solution for you. And then you have to explain why that is important to you, right? So there's new revenue models, there's shared services, universities, partnerships now with content creators, right? There's a lot of buzz, and I think it's good buzz, to figure out how do we partner with content creators. They're not the enemy. They are doing sometimes really good journalism, to be honest. And so how do we partner with them? It's never going to be an either or. How do we use AI tools? And then as I mentioned, a lot of our groups are doing a lot more actionable explainers for people because that brings in audience. So we are also now thinking about how do we partner with there are more journalism funds than Press Forward, right? There's one in Brazil, there's one in the UK, there's the one in Media Forward Fund in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. We are trying to make sure we are learning about each other, staying in touch with each other, sharing anything that we can do over time. I went to Italy for the first time to meet with a bunch of them a few months ago. And one of our funders in particular, MacArthur, has already funded some of these international funds and wants to do more. And so I'll talk with Carlos, but they are committing almost $1 million to support these funds around the country, including in parts of Latin and South America. Still figuring out criteria and everything, but the bottom line is, I think, and we're trying to frankly raise additional money in addition to that, because we want our people to understand that this is not just US based. This has nothing to do with just the US. This is happening worldwide. Freedom is just, the press is just being attacked in so many places. It's just finally coming to the US. And frankly, when I went to Italy, I learned so much from the other countries. You guys can help us. Because our people are sometimes still in denial, to be honest. Some of my funders, they're like, what do you mean? That only happens over there. I go, that's not true. I've got example after example after example of stuff happening here. And it's only getting worse, not better. And so if an outlet comes to you and says, I need money for physical safety for my outlet, I need money for mental health for my journalists, should be a yes for you. That's not a soft, oh, I don't need to do that. That is something that is important if you want to keep the news afloat. So we are proud to be able to train up our funders on different things that they should be supporting going forward. Okay, lastly, we spend a lot of time as translating between journalists and funders and publishers and editors and the foundation world. We sit in the middle, and we translate for them a lot. And so this is a slide we've just come up with over the last few months because I spend a lot of time. Journalists ask me all the time, how do I talk to funders? I go in, I make a pitch, they don't give me the money, I go home. I go, that's not the right way to do it. You have to show to fund, be they individuals or foundations, you have to show that you have already done deep community listening, that you have researched those. I know this is work. Let me just be clear. I'm sorry. To get money from foundations and individuals takes a little bit of work, all right? It's a skill set. That's why they pay people to do it. And so you've got to do that research. It's not just, you don't just go in and say freedom of the press and they give you money. It's just not the way it works. I'm sorry. So you got to do your research. You got to show that you did that research. You don't go to an art funder and ask for money for science journalism, which I've seen people do because they didn't do their research, right? Figure that out and figure out what your community that you are supporting wants, and then convey that to the funder. You have to explain how you work. What I said from the beginning is funders do not understand journalism. You do a great job of talking about other people. You do a horrible job of talking about yourself. And you have to talk more about yourself. How do you pick that story? It's not they're going to influence the stance of the story or the lens of the story. But that's what they ask of every other group that they are funding. How do you do your work and why did you do that? They're going to ask the same thing of you. So you should have a pitch, an elevator speech about how you do that, why you did that, why you're just concentrating on 3 particular communities or one particular area. You got to be able to talk to them about that. And then frankly, they want to see collaboration. They want to see that you're thinking outside the box. They're not going to fund something that came up that you did the same thing 10 years ago. It's just not how foundations work. And so how are you thinking collaboratively? Maybe 3 of you are going to a foundation together, and you want to focus on a particular region, on a particular area, and you're going to work together. And I'm going to do this part. Baltimore Banner just did this. They worked with a group in Chicago, in Baltimore, and another group all talking about violence with young men. It was beautiful, actually, and they got money to do it because it was a joint effort, right? Foundations have to, foundations are also under a lot of pressure right now in the US. They've never experienced a time like this where so many things are being threatened that they funded. They don't usually go first. They fund after government. But when government goes away, then who's funding first? And so they have a lot of pressures. And so for you to convince them to give to news, they've got to understand from you how you fit into the rest of the things that they fund. So this is just advice. I've seen it work. People have told me they've used it and come back and gotten money. I'm done. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Okay.
Bueno, muchas gracias a Dale. Thank you very much, Dale, for your presentation. Tenemos 5 minutitos para alguna pregunta puntual. Hay unos micrófonos repartidos por la sala, así que si alguien se quiere aventurar, acá Carlos va a romper el hielo y los animo a que vayan pensando alguna pregunta más.
Thank you very much, Dale, for your presentation. I would like to ask you if Press Forward is open to funding pilot projects that assess the feasibility of investing in Latin American journalism ecosystems. Have you thought about this?
Yeah, so we, right now, MacArthur and Knight and Ford are probably our largest funders that fund internationally. And so we have been following their lead, to be honest. We haven't given any dollars ourselves internationally, but they want to. And so we will be working with them, absolutely, starting with these dollars coming from MacArthur, but we're trying to convince some others to get into the field as well, especially some of our individual donors who care a lot internationally. So I think the answer is yes, we just need to figure out a little bit of how to make it work.
Hi, hello. Mariano from Mediaparte, Buenos Aires, Argentina. You were mentioning about infrastructure projects. What does it mean, and what have you learned in these couple of years in this field? 1 or 2 examples of the things that you're trying to look for.
So one thing I've learned is that when you explain to regular people that local news needs other types of funding, they usually say, if they can, I would like to support. We're doing a lot of messaging research right now. It's going to come out in about another month. We've done focus groups with all types of people. And what we find is that most residents don't understand there's a problem in local news. They still get lots of information. And so they think everything's fine. But when you explain to them, oh, but you know, that thing went away, and why did you even read that thing? They then, even some of the people who don't have much income, say, oh no, I would subscribe to that. But like I said, you guys don't do a great job of talking about yourselves. So we're spending a lot of time talking about you to others and helping our chapters understand to do that work too. So one thing is just fundraising is always about communication. And we haven't done a good job in the journalism space about communicating about why there is a problem and that there is a problem. And so that's going to have to happen over the next 5 years in order to bring more money, I think, into the space. So that's one of our learnings. And the second one is just that I am fascinated, and I do a lot of traveling. There's so many different types of outlets right now. People are trying so many different things. Between platforms, you know, WhatsApp, Facebook, digital only, still print. One woman in West Virginia, because she knows her community, she still prints and she hand delivers it. In her community, that works, right? So to me, there's no box. Everybody should be, and I'm telling that to the funders, don't act like, well, that doesn't look like what I saw 5 years ago. If they're willing to try some things, the group in Texas that owns a cafe and they're bringing money in through the cafe. People are trying lots of different ways to get revenue into the space, and frankly, I think we're gonna have to help you all experiment with that. But it can't just be, I say this a lot, I know you write great stories and you do great work, and that alone is not enough anymore. We've got to do more, and we've got to explain more, and so that's been one of my learnings.
Thank you, Dale. We have two more questions first.
Yes, hello, good morning. Mark Benson from Aruba, 24hora.com. Question, when the funding occurs, what are the deliverables? I assume that you just don't fund and look away. What happens after you give funding?
Yeah, so it's a little different at each time. We're learning in Press Forward. The money we gave last summer to the 205, that literally is general operating support. They can use it however they want. It's a 2-year grant. And frankly, we are doing, in addition to that, we want to make sure those 205 are sustainable, right? Because we want to show funders, how do you help sustain outlets? So we're doing a lot of capacity building. It'll get announced soon, all 205 are going to get sustainability audits through Lion twice. So they can see where they are now, how they grow, and baseline, and do they get better. So we believe in both money and capacity building. And we're trying to get our funders to understand it's a both and. It's not you just give them money and look away. I'll tell you, when outlets come to me and they say, I need, or they're trying to talk to funders and I need money for these reporters, I tell our funders you should also be asking, and who are they hiring on the business side, right? It's not just so we're trying to get people to understand it's a both and. We just, the groups that, we're putting them on Slack channels so that they can talk to each other. This is a crazy time. No one has the answer. And so we're spending a lot of time connecting them so that they can connect it over states, over types of outlets. So no, we're not looking away. We now have we're gonna have about 240 grantees as of today. We hired a grantee engagement manager. We're probably gonna hire a second one because people want to talk to each other, right? They're learning in real time, good and bad. So we're spending a lot of time not just looking away once we fund you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, good morning, Donatella from APEWIX. I have a two-part question very quickly. So how do journalists or media deal with ideological bias to ask for money? And if you have some kind of a recommendation for institutions or entities that support journalists, like an infrastructure support, what kind of recommendation can you give them in order to connect with funders and forgetting about bias, ideological bias that, in my view, controls where the money flows? Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'm going to try both of them. So first, just on the ideological bias, one of the trainings we are doing with all of our funders, and we're going to try to anybody who comes through Press Forward, whether you join us or whether you just read some things on our website, we're trying to get funders to understand you cannot influence the editorial side of the news, period. There's a hard line. And if you want to do that, then don't join Press Forward. Do that separately in some way, shape, or form. We are about editorial independence. And so, but we have to train them up because some people want to just fund an arts beat and they have an opinion about that arts beat, right? And I will just say, I've experienced that myself. I'm on the board of the nonprofit news that I started in Ohio. I got approached within 6 months of that thing opening from someone I knew who just didn't understand that they couldn't ask me to influence a story, right? And I had to learn how to say no to that. And so these are some trainings that have to happen with board members, with all of that. So we are spending a lot of time doing that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen or it's tried, but it's a learning that has to happen in the field, and we are working with the Poynter Institute and others to get that out into the field of philanthropy. That's one. Two, in terms of what we call intermediaries and the journalism support organizations, we are actually, hopefully in the next couple of months, going to be previewing, we're working with, we don't do everything ourselves, we work with a lot of partners and consultants. We've partnered with a few people to kind of do a mapping of all those groups, because it turns out there's a lot more of you than I thought, and individual outlets nor funders sometimes know which ones to work with, or what you will bring to them, or how you will help them. And so we're trying to do like a directory, but online, and that can be updated on a pretty regular basis, and with a little bit of editorial around, if you're at this phase, use this organization, right? If you're at this size, use this organization. There's nothing really like that, and it's driving all our funders crazy. And so we are trying really hard we don't want to organize that field. We're not forcing mergers and that kind of stuff, but we need people to understand you better in order to use your services, because services are out there, but people don't always know how to get to you. So we're spending a lot of time, that's the catalyze. We're trying to help the field itself work better given the changes in the conditions that we all work under. Good?
Thank you, Dale. Otro aplauso para ella. Muchas gracias.